Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our fifth session. Um, if you have been here before, we are reintroducing someone, LaQuentus Brown. He was here for our second session, and he will give us a breakdown on the immigration and the policy in today's time. Further ado, I'm not going to take up too much time. I'm going to pass it over.
All right. Thank you, Yasmin. I appreciate you guys for having me again. Give me one moment to share my screen. And today we will be talking about the state of U.S. immigration. All right. Is everyone able to see the screen? All right. So, for the state of U.S. immigration today in 2025, we've had a lot going on. We recently had Donald Trump reelected as president for a second term, which began January 21st. And so we've had about 3 months of to see what his administration, what their plan is, and what their policies are. So for this agenda, we're basically just going to do a quick history of immigration in America, just to kind of give a big picture overview of what immigration has been taking place throughout American history, and kind of address some misconceptions about immigration, specifically that it's a recent issue. We'll also dive into understanding the recent U.S. immigration policy, the changes with Trump, and what kind of differs from his approach to former President Joe Biden's approach. We'll talk about how schools are approaching it, who's impacted, and what rights people have, because people do still have rights. As aggressive as Trump's administration has been in immigration and their immigration policy, and as conservative as they've been, it's very important to know what rights we actually do still have, and just some ways to be proactive and resources in Connecticut, because Connecticut is a state that does provide a lot. So first, I just wanted to give just a brief history of immigration where we kind of just took a look from 1820 to 2012, just to see that immigration hasn't been a recent, and I don't want to say issue as in problem or as an issue as political position or political conversation. It's been existing almost since this country's inception. And all that's changed is who are these immigrants? Where do they come from? What foreign territories are they born in? We've seen, as you could kind of see from the graph just briefly, in about from 1900 to 1920, we've seen similar amounts in terms of volume as we have in the 2000s to 2012. So it's not that there's an incredible amount more or much has changed. It's just really where the people are coming from, and kind of how each president has addressed immigration through their administration. So first, just to do a history of immigration recently, these are the last five presidents, excuse me. It doesn't include Trump's most recent term, but the one thing I wanted to address as well as a misconception is that it's fully a partisan issue. Since President Obama, we've seen Americans lean a little bit more conservatively towards the issue of immigration. And as you can see, and from 93 to 2000 during President Clinton's administration, there were more returns than removals. So removals are essentially deportations. Enforcement returns are returns where people voluntarily decide to leave. They know that a removal may be impending, or before they even kind of go through the political proceedings that may potentially lead to removal, they just leave on their own during enforcement returns. We've seen those increase over the last three presidents, but we've also seen Title 42 expulsions increase. Title 42 expulsions, to give a brief kind of description of this policy, because it doesn't fully take place as much anymore. It's a policy where presidents and through their legislation can remove individuals that are deemed health hazards, or may provide a health scare to a community. You see a lot of those from 2020 to 2023. So COVID is a big reason for that. People who may have had COVID or contracted it, those people were expelled. But for the most part, we don't see Title 42 expulsions anymore, because there's no ongoing health crisis or health pandemic. But I really just wanted to give an overview to kind of show that no matter if it's been recently under Democrats or Republicans, there has been an uptick and an increase in removals, enforcement returns, administrative returns, and overall just kind of the increased numbers of deportations. Some of those are due to local policies. They aren't always just due to federal administration pushes, but it is something where we see as Americans as a whole are becoming a bit more conservative towards how we treat immigration. And I'm going to go into again, this is just monthly removals. As we see, you see a breakdown of the monthly highs from President Obama, President Trump, and President Biden. Now, this is where I kind of wanted to begin to separate where we the difference in the removals. So when you see President Biden's numbers, you look at the poll and say, wow, those numbers are much higher than Trump's first administration. But the difference is President Biden's administration focused on border crossings. So specifically, people who very recently entered the US illegally, whether it's crossing a border or some other mode of transportation, they those people who were recently entered the US would be the people who would mainly be targeted from the Biden administration. In opposition, Trump's administration tends to target more people who've been long term residents, people who have been in America, people who have families in America. Those are more of the foreign born residents he and his legislation is focused on. So if they've also focused more on less on border crossings. So so that's led to a lot of debates in terms of the volume that's entering versus if Trump's policies are actually working in terms of decreasing immigration or how effective it actually is. But just to give an idea again of the difference in how these administrations approach it. President Biden focused more so on if you illegally entered and didn't follow the former formal process, which his administration had resources for a formal process. And Trump's presidency focuses more on people who are already here and established. So to kind of focus more on that, for his first term, we saw a lot of deterrence. So what does that look like? Travel bans. People who are from certain countries aren't allowed to enter. There's green card limitations. They would do things like create obstacles where they'd say there was a daily quota. So if you were applying for a green card, they may say, hey, we met our quota for today, try again another day, just to create obstacles that would deter people from persevering and continuing to be persistent in earning these green cards. They went through a process of cancellation of temporary protected status and limiting asylum seekers. So, temporary protected status is for people who are coming from countries or places that are going through some form of upheaval, political upheaval. They may be a country going through a war or some form of conflict. We will give those people temporary protected status so that they can live in America and work in America, be able to obtain visas and jobs, and be able to have some of the rights of citizens without worrying about when the rug may be pulled under them or when they may be targeted by ICE agents or anyone involved in enforcement of immigration. But we've started to see those statuses and people from certain countries, including Nicaragua, Haiti, Honduras, Sudan, El Salvador. We've seen the cancellation of some of those people's protected statuses. So where they once were able to work in America and not worry as much about their ability to live their lives freely without worrying about enforcement agents, those people now very abruptly had those statuses removed from them and are seeking ways to maintain their living arrangements. And the limitations on asylum seekers. Similarly, asylum applications were denied. There were obstacles like the daily quotas I mentioned. There were limits on the amount of people who could enter. They started creating appointments which wouldn't be met. So they would tell you to schedule an appointment. So if you wanted to apply for asylum and be able to enter the US, you would just have to come and have an interview on a certain appointment date, and then they wouldn't honor those dates. So again, just a lot of ways to deter people from actually obtaining a visa. And families, we also saw as a deterrent are the families that, even though the Trump administration didn't focus on border crossings, and the times that they did have border crossings arrests, they would separate families. They would send the adults to prison and they would send the children to shelters. And that was, again, one of their administration's moves to really deter people from even coming to the border. They will let people know, if you come and you're arrested, you'll be separated from your child and you have to go through a lengthy legal process in order to reunite these families. Some of these people are still separated from his first term, so that's just another example of a very aggressive and conservative form of deterrence we've seen through Trump's administration. In his second term, we've seen fear mongering. So they want people to leave voluntarily. They create a lot of interest in the media and a lot of narratives to really give people the sense that they will find you, they will deport you, so you might as well leave voluntarily, which a lot of people are doing at this time. His goal, again, was to deter border crossings and threatening schools and agencies in order to comply. So, what he would do is withhold federal dollars from different schools and agencies. We've seen right now, one of the current news is his administration's threatening of Harvard for not complying for specific orders. And federal dollars, as we kind of mentioned in the last presentation, how they affect schools and communities and localities. That's really his way of saying, hey, if you don't follow what I'm doing, I'm going to start removing resources and create a political pressure to where you have citizens who feel they need these resources start to kind of pressure the government to follow his orders, in absence of respecting the previous immigration setups. And then we also see a deporting foreign residents. So I really want to emphasize the aspect of residents. These people have been in America for a long time. In the specific case, one that's been on the news lately is a gentleman named Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He's from El Salvador. He's been a resident in the United States since 2011, and the Trump administration they actually deported him to El Salvador and alleged that he had a criminal history and he had an alliance to the MS-13, which is a gang in Central America. But in all actuality, there's no proof. His attorneys have sought proof. There's been no evidence actually submitted by the Trump administration proving he has any association with this gang. And that's something we've also seen is the Trump administration, and I'll break down through which policy in my next slide. His administration is using laws to deport people and the alleging that they have criminal history or that they're taking part in crimes. And some of these things are unsubstantiated. They don't have evidence attached to them, but it's just the way they're able to move people forward in the process and get them deported and then kind of worry about things after, which has led to a lot of uproar. It's led to people, whether it be justice advocates or Democrat senators, who have gone to visit Kilmar Garcia and really try to work to help some of these people who have been deported be able to return because they lived in America lawfully and haven't violated anything that would lead to their deportation. So the laws Trump is using, is a law called Title 8. So in the U.S. Code of Laws, there's a section called Aliens and Nationality, and those laws encompass all immigration, naturalization, and citizenship, and really create the guidelines for enforcement. And under Section 212F, the president is granted broad authority to suspend the entry of any aliens or a class of aliens, or impose restrictions on their entry if deemed detrimental to U.S. interests through a presidential proclamation. So this section is really where he's using this presidential authority through various executive orders in order to, again, detain and deport people. And as it says, some of these laws are written to be vague, and you see how politicians are able to manipulate them if deemed detrimental to U.S. interests. That what he would deem as detrimental to U.S. interests is crime, and that's how he's able to deport people with the alleged criminal activity. Again, a lot of this criminal activity hasn't actually been proven in courts of law, but This is just his pathway that he's able to use to enforce immigration enforcement in this country. So the community effects of Title 8 and Section 212F, it's led to an expedited removal. So expedited removal is the process of low-level immigration officers removing certain non-citizens from the United States without a hearing. So the United States is a formal process in which people go through in order to before they make the final determination on your citizenship and your status within the country. And what Trump is one of the executive orders that he's utilized is expedited removal. So this process allows, again, when we say low level immigration officers, these aren't people who are even sometimes working for the Department of Homeland Security or some of the actual official enforcement bodies who are in charge of making sure people are, whether it's returned, whether your status is certified, whatever it may be. These are low level people who are, again, just beginning the process of investigating or detaining people. They're removing people without a hearing. So before you're able to have your attorney, before you're able to utilize your legal aid and your legal pathways to access your documents and really defend your claim in this country, people are being removed. So if an individual is afraid of returning to their home country, an immigration officer must refer them for a credible fear interview. So one suggestion a lot of legal advocates have made in order to navigate this pathway without being removed is to express a credible fear for returning to your country. So again, because a lot of people had their temporary protected status removed, and your country may have a political upheaval going on, a conflict going on, where you feel at risk returning, you have that ability to have a credible fear interview where they will interview and investigate what is your fear, can we substantiate it, and it's just another pathway to keep people as residents who haven't unlawfully entered the United States or um, unlawfully violated their ability to remain here. And again, expanded reach is another thing we've seen from the Trump administration. So expanded reach used to be used on people within 100 miles of the border within 14 days of arriving to the United States. So essentially, if you were, and again, this is what I was referring to in terms of how the Biden administration focused on immigration. If you had been within 100 miles of the border or entered within 14 days and were arrested, you would be removed. Unfortunately, for the Trump administration, if you're an undocumented person in this country who can't prove that they've been in the United States for 2 years before an arrest, you will be removed. And this has no border. This doesn't go just 100 miles from the border. This is anywhere within the country. You could be in the Midwest. You can be very far from a border to the United States. And this expanded reach has allowed people to be deported just simply for being arrested. And they may not be able to prove that they may not be able to prove their citizenship because they may not have their papers on hand at the time of their arrest. That hasn't barred this administration from removing people, unfortunately. And this is just a list of some of the nationalities who are affected by Trump's removal policy. People are arriving from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, largely Central and South American countries. With the Dominican Republic, we have a Caribbean country. So these are a lot of the countries that not only are in proximity to America, but I also want to include this to kind of highlight that these are countries that are also affected by some of these Trump policies. Some of the people who immigrate to America, a lot of times we hear, illegal immigration, and we think people are just breaking laws to get into America. But a lot of times their countries are going through political upheaval due to policies enacted by the president. So these people are seeking asylum and protected statuses so that they aren't affected by some of the policies and things he enacted in their actual homelands. And again, they're being met with kind of the same callous reaction that they would have if they were home, unfortunately. So countries recent immigrants are from and where they are going. This is just a map to kind of show. A lot of times, one misconception I hear a lot is that a lot of the immigrants are just Mexicans. But a lot of these people are coming from other countries that are affected by Trump's policies: Colombia, Venezuela, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. These are the top countries we see immigrants come from, and we see them immigrate all over the U.S. From whether it's the Western United States, Southern America, or the Northeast. We see these people kind of go where they can and where they can find resources. And unfortunately, this is another aspect of this most recent administration where we're seeing some of the drawbacks from their immigration policy. We have a lot of deportees being returned to countries they aren't from. So we saw the previous list where we saw countries like Colombia, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, but we didn't see Peru. We didn't see Ecuador. Some of these people are being deported to countries that are in third party agreements with the United States. So essentially, in order to be deported, a country has to agree to take deportees in, whether it's on an individual basis or on a by large basis. And for the countries who have refused, and not refused because they have an issue with their citizens returning, they're refusing in order to fight back against Trump's policies, where you're taking long-term residents of the United States or removing, and they're now Americans, removing them from their home. These countries have really kind of said, "Hey, we'd like to refuse. We don't want to accept those deportees." So instead, and in the hopes that they would be able to stay. Unfortunately, that's led to Trump going into agreements with other countries to say, hey, for example, some of the smaller countries you see listed are countries that have refused. So a country like Venezuela says, hey, we won't be accepting deportees specifically because of political disagreements we're having with your administration, and we want those people to remain home where they are. We don't want to cause an upheaval in their life or disrupt their current residency. Well, the Trump administration will go, hey, if you don't want to take them back to Venezuela, I'm going to make an agreement with a separate country and see if I can have them sent there. So we see a lot of people not even being returned to their actual homelands, unfortunately. So Connecticut's stance on immigration, fortunately, is Connecticut's a sanctuary state. It limits cooperation with federal enforcement efforts and provides benefits to immigrants, including undocumented residents. So, if you're undocumented, if you are a resident of Connecticut who has their documentation, regardless, Connecticut is going to provide resources to help you. They're going to limit the ability for law enforcement to obtain your information. They won't voluntarily give up any information, even if it's information that their own law enforcement agencies have. The Trust Act in Connecticut restricts state and local law enforcement from cooperating with federal immigration authorities, except when someone commits a Class A or Class B felony. Those are violent crimes. If you're not committing something that's considered a violent crime, Connecticut won't permit their authorities to pass on your information. Things such as your address, your place of work, identifiers, things that will enable federal law enforcement to quickly come in, identify what community people are in, and detain them. Connecticut is acting as a buffer in order to limit that and be a hindrance to it. So Connecticut also allows undocumented residents to receive licenses, state ID, financial aid, and access to in-state tuition. And many of these things also help their pathways in order to become citizens. So Connecticut really does allow undocumented residents to enjoy rights that in some states are exclusive just to citizens or people who have been born within that state or born within the United States. So if you're a resident in Connecticut, you can feel safe that the state will do its best in order to protect you, but also in order to let you enjoy your rights and continue to live your life. So, what are your rights? So, unfortunately, with each administration change, specific rights change. So, in present day, under the Trump administration, we really have two specific rights, and it's the right to refuse an unwarranted search or seizure without probable cause. So, this basically means Federal enforcement agents don't have the ability to search your home, your property, your belongings without probable cause. They don't have the ability to seize any belongings without probable cause. They would need a warrant in order to be able to search domiciles or seize anything, unless, again, they have probable cause. So, again, just limiting interaction with law enforcement is really important under this administration because they're using interactions with law enforcement as a point of contact. They're using arrests as their ability to, hey, we detain you for this arrest, now we have you, we can process you and and enforce our immigration policies against you. So, again, just limiting interaction with law enforcement is one of the most productive ways. And then students under 18 are not required to carry identification or legal paperwork, but students 18 and over and individuals 18 and over need to have their citizenship paperwork on them. Again, remain silent and ask an attorney before answering any questions for law enforcement. If law enforcement approaches someone and they're 18 and over and they ask for proof of citizenship or proof of identification, they do have to present that, but they don't have to say anything else. They can remain silent, request an attorney. They do have the right to remain silent, and they don't have to divulge any information until their attorney is present. And that's, again, just one of the best ways to safeguard. If you do have an interaction with law enforcement, simply comply, provide what paperwork you have. If you don't have them on you, again, request an attorney, because then whether the paperwork can be accessed or something that an attorney needs, that would be the best point of contact in order to ensure rights aren't violated or there's no expedited removal process without the proper legal channels being sought after. And schools are approaching this by training staff on how to address ICE encounters in all places on school grounds. So whether it's door entry, playgrounds, or phone calls, they're monitoring who's on or near school grounds. ICE enforcement agents have been investigating school grounds, have been monitoring school grounds for people that they are suspecting of being undocumented or illegal immigrants. So schools are really doing their due diligence to make sure they know who's near school grounds, who may be looking around, who may be asking questions in order to, again, limit these interactions and protect students and their families. They're using IDs and background checks to verify identity before admitting anyone into schools. This is really to make sure that anyone entering the school is exactly who they present themselves to be, that no ICE agent or federal agent is presenting themselves as someone else, entering the school, and then using that entrance as an ability to detain or investigate a child or their family. And they're only allowing administration or higher level educators to verify warrants. So, um, in terms of who can actually verify these warrants in order to commit these search and seizures or detainments, they're only allowing principals, assistant superintendents, or district attorneys. Principals are extremely rare case. Most school districts are just leaving it to assistant superintendents, and the school district attorneys. Just to one, create an obstacle for ICE enforcement agents so that it's a deterrent for the child, so the child may be able to, you know, find a way to exit the school grounds before that agent is able to detain them. But it's also to, again, just to check the validity, just to make sure that these people are who they're claiming to be, that this warrant is signed by an actual judge, that it is a lawful warrant, and to verify the parties and their information. They want to ensure no one is actually posing as anyone. They want to ensure that and no one has an old warrant or an unlawful warrant that hasn't been signed, but still using this as grounds for people who may not know their rights to detain someone legally. So ways you could be proactive. So first, as a parent, you can remove your child from a school's directory. So most schools have instructions on how to do so in their student handbook. So students' information is protected by FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and it protects the students' education records and their actual personal identification records, almost like a HIPAA. So some schools have forms online that you can fill out in order to remove your student from that directory, or you can call the school to remove your child from the directory. I've actually spoken to a principal in Meriden School District who's going through that process in order to just protect students who may be undocumented or may have investigation, may be investigated by federal agents. By removing that information, they won't be able to capture that information. They won't be able to go through any pathway to access that information and get information on children in order to detain them or their families. The next most important thing is to teach your children their rights. So reinforce short phrases like I can't open the door without my parents present, or I don't want to talk without my parents present. Again, children don't have to present identification, and children shouldn't be. I say shouldn't because unfortunately we found cases where they have been, but children shouldn't be questioned by law enforcement agents without a parent or an attorney present. So again, you want to say, I can't open the door without my parents present. I don't want to talk without my parents present. And that will really protect the child from saying anything that they may not fully have information on, or they may not be fully acquainted with how to address an immigration enforcement agent. This will really protect them and just ensure the person looking out for their best interests and who can vocalize and articulate their best interests and um, their legal situation, making sure they're present to protect the child. And then keeping legal US documents organized with copies. So birth certificates, passports, emergency contacts, have copies of mail with your name on it older than 2 years. These are just things that people can use to prove their citizenship and prove their identity. It's important to have copies of these because you don't want to have your only one copy or your main copy, and then a law enforcement agent misplaces it, if they damage it in any way, now you no longer have a copy to prove who you are and that you belong in this country. So you just want to have those legal documents organized with plenty of copies so that in any event anything takes place, you have those documents to prove your legitimacy and your place in this country. And you have copies of your mail older than 2 years. So again, because remember the Trump administration is focusing on if you've been arrested and can't prove you've been a citizen longer than 2 years, they will use that to expedite your removal without a proper court hearing. So if you have mail with your name on it older than 2 years, these can be the things that actually hinder that expedited removal and give individuals the time to utilize the proper legal channels in order to defend their residency. And then lastly, if you truly feel at risk, if an individual truly feels that their residency is at risk and that they may be separated or detained by enforcement agents, you want to create a power of attorney authorizing someone to care for your children in your absence. These documents could be found on Law Depot or Rocket Lawyer. They have free templates for people to utilize. Also, you want to have a plan with emergency caretakers. So the person you will be authorizing as the power of attorney to care for your child, you want to make sure there's a plan. Well, if you are detained unlawfully or detained abruptly, what's the plan for how they're picked up from school, how they maintain their presence in school, how are they able to communicate with you if possible? What are some of their health documents? Who are their doctors? You want to have all that important information discussed and created in a plan. Again, if you truly feel at risk, this is more something legal professionals consider a last resort, something that it's good to have, but hopefully is kind of a scenario no one ever wants you to go through. But if you do feel at risk, these are just some of the protections you can have in order to ensure that your child is unaffected as much as possible. And so resources in Connecticut. So Connecticut has a lot of resources in terms of who can help, organizations that do help. and not just with um, immigration enforcement, but also just with the immigration transition. So first, we have the Connecticut Immigrant Center, and they have offices in Danbury, Connecticut. But they also work out of Hartford as well. And Hartford, they specialize in removal cases, non-detained cases only. So for people who maybe have received correspondence that they are being removed, or that their status in America is pending or in jeopardy, this is a center that definitely helps there. They practice defensive asylum, unaccompanied minors. So again, if a minor is being questioned and their parent may have been detained, the parent may not be there or be able to represent their child or be an advocate for their child. This center will do so. They work in the cancellation of removal, so really just working to defend people's residency. And they do speak Spanish, so they are a bilingual organization. We have the Integrated Refugee and Immigrant Services. IRIS helps newcomers with services and support critical to their transition to self sufficiency and to making local communities across the US their home. So, again, they also focus on the transition. So, if you've newly immigrated to America and you're transitioning, and this is an organization who can really help in terms of making your transition easier, providing resources for you and your children to just make sure that you come to America and are able to be as independent as possible. And the Catholic Charities, the Institute for the has an Institute for the Hispanic Family. This is a resource where they have services for Spanish-speaking residents in Greater Hartford. It's a Catholic institution, but they welcome all faiths and backgrounds. They serve senior citizens, children, families, anyone who's truly in need, whether it may be you need behavioral health issues, special education help, you have a lack of basic needs. This is again another transition organization that just helps people have the resources they need as you come into a new country, being able to have resources that you could depend on so you can be self-sufficient and work to create a sense of normalcy. The Connecticut Institute for Refugees and Immigrants is a statewide nonprofit agency that provides legal and social services to immigrants. So they range from new arrivals who need their most basic needs all the way to people who are seeking legal assistance. So whether you're a new arrival or a long-term resident, they'll have some form of service or resource they can provide you, teaching English classes, refugee resettlement, job training, job placement, counseling, and this agency is also multilingual as well. They have interpreters who speak Spanish, Haitian Creole, and different dialects, so they can really help all form of refugees resettle. And they provide counseling, translation. So if you have legal documents that you may need translated, they can do that as well. They focus on job training and job placement. So they're really a beginning to end organization who help people from start to finish in their relocation and getting settled in America, becoming self-sufficient, but also protecting your status if that ever comes into question. You may be someone who's settled in America and very stable, but your status may be in jeopardy. They'll provide that legal assistance to help. The American Place at the Hartford Public Library. So this is just a hub for information. It connects newcomers with city services and resources. It provides a lot of education and career transitions, and they offer a robust English language program, focusing on adult education, financial literacy, workforce readiness programs. So TAP is really for people who need help in their transition in terms of, I don't want to say assimilating, but gaining more information in America and learning English, learning what resources you have available to you, understanding financial literacy to understand the American economy. Some of these things just to really help transition people again. Then the Center for Latino Progress has legal immigration services. So again, this is to help people in terms of providing legal, linguistic, or culturally competent services. So, whether you need translation of documents, you need the creation of documents, you need defense for your residency, this is a program who kind of covers everything in terms of legal aid. And then again, Greater Hartford Legal Aid. They are a nonprofit that provides a range of free legal services to low income residents. So they're providing legal immigration assistance for immigrant victims of crime. So if you're an immigrant who's had a crime committed against you, and again, as I mentioned, limiting law enforcement interactions, you may be the victim of a crime. You may not be the perpetrator of a crime, but that law enforcement interaction could now have you subject to questions from immigration enforcement agents. This is a legal aid who help those people and help those people because again, they've done nothing unlawful to put their status in jeopardy. This is a legal aid for people under those circumstances. But they also provide services in the adjustment of status. Someone could maybe transitioning from a visa to a green card or a green card to permanent residency. They're able to help with those adjustments. They're able to help with employment authorization, naturalization and citizenship, and Violence Against Women Act as well. Some of the people who are unfortunately subject to scrutiny from the Trump administration are women who've had domestic violence against them. They may have been had violence committed against them against their partner who's a citizen, but they aren't a citizen. Now they're subject to legal scrutiny, and their residency is under question. This is a legal aid who can help with those as well. So Connecticut really has a depth of resources to help people in any situation you may be in, any situation you may find yourself, your children, or anyone around you in, or even if you just want to be as a precaution create documents and protections so that there's a plan for you and your family. Connecticut has a lot of those resources available to do those to low to no cost at all. And that is the end of my presentation. Are there any questions at all?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Let me see if I can take this so we can
You want me to take the slide down?
yeah, if you could do that. There we
Uh,
go. Awesome. First off, I want to say this was very informative. I know last time we had you for the political piece, but this one was in a wealth worth of knowledge, and I think that it could be very beneficial for the people who need this information. So I wanted to say that first, like the graphs and things of that nature. But I did have a couple of questions that I wrote. I'm not gonna ask all of them. I have a few, but when you talked about the laws that they were, I don't remember what they were, but the laws that Trump was using, um, to kind of say that these people are breaking a crime or suspected of breaking a crime. Um, if he's breaking the law and doing that, because that's essentially what he's doing, because maybe it's not, maybe it's like a gray, he's kind of teetering the line of what is and what's not. um but if it's not like in solid, why is there not an immediate release of the people who are processed? Like, I forgot the gentleman's name, but I've been hearing about him in the news as well. So what if they're taking them as fast as off of speculation, why aren't they being released just as fast off of speculation, like if any other case was happening?
Yeah, so unfortunately, our legal process was designed to be slow. So even in these situations where someone's taking advantage of the legal process, it's slow to kind of recorrect those mistakes. So there have been so first there have been federal judges who have barred some of those separations and detainees and deportees. They've barred those from being deported and stop the Trump administration from imposing the restrictions on them and getting them out of the country. Unfortunately, in the case of a lot of deportees like Mr. Kilmar Garcia, he was already deported. The Trump administration, like I mentioned, they've expedited these removals. So they're removing people faster than the legal process can stop it. So in a lot of cases where there was this in Kilmar Garcia's case. Some people didn't know he was detained by the time he was gone. They didn't know he was out of the United States by the time he was already deported and back in El Salvador.
Oh
So
wow.
at that point, there becomes a separate legal pathway that you have to do to get them back because of the associated costs, because someone had the federal government pays for people to be deported. So in a situation where someone has to be returned, the federal government doesn't want to pay for the
You can't get
return.
that money back.
Exactly. So you're asking the same administration who spent money to remove you to spend money to return you. So there's
That's crazy.
there's yeah, so it's causing a lot of political uproar because, as you mentioned, it's illegal, and it people know it's illegal. But the issue with this administration now is enforcing this administration to follow the law after the fact.
So
So
essentially, them forcing, and I have another question too, but just them forcing the hand to remove these detainees, because I know, not detainees, some of these immigrants, I know that it costs a certain amount to fly, you know, to Guantanamo Bay, where they were bringing some of the immigrants. So if it costs money to do that, it's basically he's forcing their hand to spend the money, and they know that they, instead of, spending it right away, they would have to essentially, basically you'd be losing more money if you kept bringing people than taking people back. So it seems like Trump knows that, which is why he's doing what he's doing.
exactly, he knows
Okay.
that people people, especially American citizens, again, these are all taxpayer dollars being used to deport these people. So he knows that if I focus on the fact that you have to spend money to bring them back, maybe I'll deter some people from
Spending the
pressuring.
money to get you back.
Exactly.
That's insane.
So
Uh,
really, it comes down to political pressure and leverage. Right now, at this moment, there's not a lot of leverage to force him to bring these people back. So that's something that current Democrats in the Senate are really trying to focus on, and they've been going out to visit Mr. Garcia to really just kind of allow the international community to see the injustice, to see if maybe some of our allies, trade partners, or other people could also put that political pressure on the Trump administration to return these people, but also to act in good faith from here on out.
right. Which leads me to my last question for you. I know that El Salvador is involved in a lot of, I don't know if they did a trade or whatever the case is, but I know they struck a deal or are striking a deal to take some of the detainees and immigrants to El Salvador. So my question to you is, why would another country be invested in taking immigrants that aren't outside? Like, if I'm from El Salvador, why would I want to take in Mexicans who are Americanized, or Peruvians or Honduras? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is the purpose of doing that? Because to me, it would have to be money, but maybe you can kind of expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, so it's multi-layered. It depends on the country. Excuse me. It depends on the country. Some countries have an altruistic view. I would say that's rare of the countries, but some are accepting deportees because they feel instead of having you detained for an infinite or an indefinite period, because if a country doesn't accept the deportee, they'll just remain detained. So, in order to get these people free out of prison and out of detainment, some countries are accepting people so that, hey, you can at least come here and be a citizen and live your life and do what you can, no longer in prison. Some countries, it is the money. It's the fact of Trump is either paying, it depends on the arrangement, they're either paying the country to accept the deportees or creating another trade economic incentive to accept the deportees. So, hey, you accept these people, I'll I'll grant you some relief in another area. One example we could see is some of these tariff situations we've seen are due to refusals to accept deportees or refusal to bend under any form of Trump political pressure. So again, like you said, it does come back to money. So it's really just about who will accept the incentive, but also how they feel about the people who are being deported. I know in some cases, Mexico said they would accept deportees just because they don't want people detained. They believe, hey, instead of just sitting there and being in a U.S. jail, come back to Mexico and we can work to make you a productive citizen, and reintegrate you. So it really just depends on the country and their outlook.
Are they never the last point, I guess, and I'll open up the floor. They're not able to come back to like so if I'm a deportee and I get deported to El Salvador, I can never go back to the US.
No, yeah, under
Wow.
typical, yeah, under typical deportation, and that's why again why these removals are so significant and they carry like their implications are significant because in most cases, if you are formally deported, you can't return. In cases of the the what was the exact term I used during the Biden administration? In the case of the enforcement removals or the enforcement returns, those people may have a period where they can't return to the United States. You may not be able to come back for 3 to 5 years. But if you are actually removed in a formal process, you can't return.
That's very sad that people are being used as bargaining chips, and it's a form of slavery in a sense of how they're rationing these people off. But thank you. This was great. I'm gonna open up the floor. I don't want to hog it, so thank you very much.
You
I have one more question. I have a question, but it's piggybacking off of Trey.
know.
Can so I know, well, my conspiracy feeling feels this is a lot bigger than just this. Because I know in the Constitution they said that slavery or imprisonment is only applicable if you create or if you do crime or something.
Mhm.
So then you can be used to have labor without payment. Can he send? I mean, I know he's doing it now under the disguise of immigration, but can he send naturalized citizens, homegrown Americans to these prisons to continue in because of a crime in El Salvador? Can he create a legal trade or in that, I don't know, where he can place people who are born Americans in another country because of prison or whatever concoction he comes up with?
So right now, in terms of people who are American born or naturalized citizens, there's been a federal judges have halted that. His administration has expressed they would like to prosecute people who are naturalized citizens, or if your parent entered illegally but you were born in America, you would still be able to be forcefully removed. That's been a rhetoric his administration is trying to push, and I believe through executive order they're trying to get that official and certified in the law. But as of right now, federal judges are protecting that. So for as of right now, and I say that as well because there has been um there has been some people who are naturalized citizens who've been forcefully detained and forcefully removed. So the amount we're still figuring out because it has just been 3 months, but legal experts have said this is something they know for sure to be done, and actually was done in the first iteration of his administration as well. So we're still getting some information on that, but in terms of officially in law, that's not the case. That was actually a protection Obama put in place, but those federal judges are, you know, and the reason why I say that as well is because a lot of these federal judges are appointed by each president. So depending on which court circuit you're in or which federal judge presides over the case, that law could very easily change. So if a federal judge Trump appointed is able to preside over the case, we could very easily see that reversed. So it's still one of the touch and go pieces of his administration right now.
Can born Americans who have been here, for instance, Black people, can that affect them?
At this time, no. At this time, again, I say at this time because I believe there was someone who was a child of a Haitian immigrant who's been deported. So that's again why I brought up that map as well, because a lot of people think everyone at this time who's being deported is Latino or Hispanic, but there actually are people from the Caribbean population, Jamaicans, Haitians, who have been deported as well, Black Cubans. So so yeah, so it's something that we're not seeing in large numbers right now. But in terms of again, when we brought up if they commit a crime or if they're alleged to commit a crime under the Trump administration, we have seen people use those legal pathways to get them deported.
Okay. I was now I'm asking a lot of questions. I'm
That's why.
what can I know you gave a set of how to protect yourself and provide identification, but what if you're an American born person?
If you're American born, we have our birth certificates. We have
But you're not like walking around with it. Like,
You're you're not. Yeah, you're not. In that case, because we again, the first identification they're gonna want to see is an ID. So if you have your ID, you'll be fine. If what will happen is if they truly suspect you of being someone who entered illegally or undocumented, they would request those documents, and you would have to provide those documents in order to be released or if you already are released in order to prevent court proceedings to have you removed. So at that point, we would be submitting our passports, our birth certificates, the mail that we had that's over 2 years. As American citizens, we have many of those things readily available, and also we're in state department directories. So if they were to look us up, we're easily findable in some of these registrations and some of these agencies departments where someone who's undocumented may not be.
thank you, thank you.
You're
Mm.
welcome.
I was in another training too, and they had recommended even scanning and having items available in like, like a drive or a secured space so that you have it available to you just because if you're being questioned or, that you don't have that documentation. I thought that was a good tip. I mean, sad that we have to consider that, but it's like, do you have your papers? Like, who would have thought? But I'm really grateful to live in the Northeast.
Yeah,
Um, as compared to other parts of the country.
yeah. It's really, and that's kind of the unfortunate part is it really just depends on which of the 50 states you're in terms of um, how much scrutiny there will be on your residency and your legal status. Most of the states that we see those issues are in the Southwest or the border states, which I find ironic and unfortunate because those that was Mexico's territory. So some of those people have been here for generations just because that used to be their country. So yeah, it's a difficult situation, but that's a great tip to digitize your document. So in the event if though your only copy is a digital copy, at least you know it's safe and secure and no one could do anything unlawful with it.
Um, I just have to say that when you were saying kind of breaking down the process for a child to have an exit plan or an escape plan in a school, it just made me very sad because it's not really a question, just more of a statement and just a reaction. It just made me sad because when you think about kids, no kid should have to be subjugated to on the lookout. Like, we did that as is my mom home or like you know what I'm saying? Like things of that nature. But to have kids have to be cognizant of like if there's agents or what they're supposed to do is very, very sad, and it's very troubling as far as where we're going as Americans. So I guess my last question, and I don't know if anyone else has one. I'm sorry, but the long term effects of these policies. It seems like you said before, Biden was focused on border crossings, which seems more logical. But like going after and having no jurisdiction of where or when or a time period. What are like some of the long term effects do you think these policies could have if they went through, if they were finalized and they became, you know, essentially law in a sense.
Um, it'll have a lot of long-term effects in different areas. So one thing I was reading about today is like it's going to have long-term effects on our economy just in terms of our tourism. A lot of people, excuse me, we're already seeing a dip in international tourism to America because people don't feel safe. They feel like if I enter America, will I be able to exit? Is my country a part of the travel ban list? Is my country one of the countries that had protected status removed from it? So we'll definitely see the implications financially from that. We'll also see the implications just in terms of how do I want to say it? How we interact on like an international landscape. So not only would it be people difficult for people to enter, it's going to be difficult for us to kind of travel, in a friendly and a hospitable manner. It creates what I'm seeing, and that's kind of why I wanted to point out the differences of presidents, is I feel like it's creating a feeling in America, or at least like a tone where we become less welcoming to immigrants. We subtly start to create situations where we're against immigration or where certain aspects of immigration, like for example, I noticed in terms of the border wall, when Trump ran in his first campaign and he wanted to create the border wall, everyone was against it, and Democrats ran against it. In this most recent campaign, we've seen him and President-elect Harris for a border wall, and that implication, and just in terms of Americans, how we want to separate ourselves, the way we want to keep people out, how that again leads to the tariffs. It creates a lot of economic issues where it affects our day to day, but in our access to different resources that we would get from other countries. But it also just creates like a perception of us on the international stage that I don't think will benefit us in terms of our trade agreements, how we live here, our families. Some of us have immigrants in our families, our ability to contact them, see them, travel, so I think if his policies go into law, well, and I think long term we'll also see that expand and that's kind of why I mentioned too, in the US we have a history of immigration from all over the country or all over the world. Right now, the focus is on Central and South America. When does that focus expand to include Asia, Africa? You know what I mean? Like, if we're being honest with ourselves, and that's partially again why I posted the graph, we didn't see scrutiny when the immigrants were coming from North or Western Europe, Eastern Europe. But once the immigrants started coming from East Asia, Africa, Central and South America, now we see a lot of legislation where it's truly a hot topic. And every time we have a presidential election or even local elections, immigration is a concern.
Thank you for that, Mr. Brown. I appreciate it. We appreciate it. This was very informative. Does anyone else have any questions, concerns? All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, LaQuintus Brown, for giving us that wonderful presentation. Whenever you do see this, make sure you take it in. There's a lot of information that can be learned from this. Take some notes, and just keep your head up and stay positive during troubled times. So again, thank you very much, and we are going to end.